Well, just as a side note, isn't it funny that passage, that chapter of John, verse 20, has so much in there. First of all, John gives a jab at Peter that he's faster at running than Peter, right? Wouldn't you like that recorded in all of time and history that, somebody outran you? And then Mary, the first preacher, women preachers, right? Women ministers. She was the very first one. Women proclaiming the gospel. And then it cracks me up that Mary, she's talking to angels, and it doesn't even seem like, she's like, yeah, I don't know where they've taken him. You guys know? And then she turns around and goes, if I were talking to angels, I might be acting a little bit different than that. I don't know. It's a fun book. John Gospel, chapter 20. I love it. It's one of my favorites, and I'm so glad we get to talk about it today. So, Peter, if you might hit slide number 1, we're going to talk about what good does Easter do? What good does raising Jesus from the dead really do? Is it something quaint that Christians believe? Is it something, we're all dressed up with nowhere to go? What good does it really do? Just over in February in Parkland, Florida, we all know what happened there, the atrocities that happened there, the sadness and the destruction that happened at that school there. What does the risen Christ mean to those people? And then just over a week ago was World Water Day. World Water Day. Did anybody observe World Water Day? I forgot to this year. World Water Day was over a week ago. What does the raising of Jesus from the dead have to say to people who enjoy clean water? And what does the raising of Jesus from the dead say to those people in places of the world where they don't have clean water to drink? Houston County, Minnesota has a poverty rate of 8.5%. What does the resurrection of Christ mean to that statistic? Okay? Guys, the Christian gospel, and gospel means good news. So for something to be a gospel, something to be news, it means something had to have happened. And so what does the Christian gospel mean? And let me say that the gospel is for the here and for the now. It's intended to speak to this glorious thing we call life. It's intended for life on our beautiful planet Earth. And it speaks to the problems that you may be having in your life right now, I may be having in my life right now, and the problems we experience in the larger world. Okay? The gospel, which means good news, is that Jesus is the resurrected Messiah, the King, the Lord of heaven and earth. And through Jesus, all things become new. New creation. Okay, so to cement that in our brain, Peter, if you would click over to slide number 2, I'd like to do a little bit of fun with you here, a little bit of textual biblical work. This is always so much fun. Of John chapter, in the entire Gospel of John. The entire Gospel of John. The entire Gospel of John is a new creation account. It's a second creation account. The first creation account is in Genesis 1, right? Right? I mean, you know that one. This is a second one, and I'd like to have some fun with you. What's the very first words in the Bible? Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, when God created. Here's one, maybe a little harder one. What's the very first words in the Gospel of John? In the beginning was the Word. I may see something happening here. In Genesis 1, God created everything. Do you remember which day it was that God created humanity, men and women, in Genesis 1? Which day was it? 6. Yeah. For those of us, who may have forgotten, on the 6th day, God created men and women, Adam and Eve. Now, if you were here on Good Friday, we read the story of Pilate bringing Jesus out during the trial. If you weren't, in John chapter 19 and verse 5, Pilate, the ruler there in Jerusalem, brings Jesus out. And I'm thinking of that famous painting, Ecce Homo. I love that painting. But it's when Pilate brings Jesus out and he says, "Here is the man." And it happened in John's Gospel on Friday. Friday is the 6th day of Holy Week. See where we're going? Oh, this is just fun stuff. Okay. Or maybe it's fun for me. I don't know if it's fun for you, but I'm going to have fun over here too. Now, okay. After God creates at the end of day 6 in Genesis 1, what does God say? It's finished. I'm done. Time to go, what? We're in Minnesota. Time to go cook some brats? I don't know. That's what God did. God went and finished. Now, on a more serious note, as Jesus is just about ready to die on the cross, he says, it is finished. The things that God had been doing through, you see where this is going? The new creation. Let's keep going. This is even better. Now, on Saturday, in the book of Genesis, chapter 2, we flipped over to 2, verses 1 and 2 here. What happens after God gets done? He rests. On Saturday of Holy Week, Holy Saturday, Jesus rests in the tomb. Sabbath rest. And then, John says in verse 1, I love verse 1 of chapter 20, early on the first day of the week. John just wasn't saying that it was Sunday. No. He could have said it was Sunday. He says early on the first day of the week. Let me preface or add a word. Early on the first day of the new week. The new creation week. Jesus steps from the tomb to new creation. New creation. New creation. Came out with Jesus on that Sunday morning. He stepped out of the tomb to something brand new. Now, let's continue on. Mary Magdalene, she is there, and she mistakes Jesus for the gardener. Where did God put Adam and Eve? In the garden. See where we're going? So Jesus, he's standing there, and Mary and they're like, dude, gardener, where is he? And she mistakes him for the gardener. And you know what? In a certain way, he is the gardener. He's the new gardener of the new creation that he just happened to make through his death and resurrection, because Jesus is the king, the guy that brings a new creation. Oh, but it gets better. Hold on. You're like, this is so awesome. I love this stuff. Now, okay, so Jesus, in verse 19 of chapter 20, John repeats it. When John repeats something, that means we should pay attention. He said, when it was evening on the first day of the week. He just didn't say at dinner time. He said when it was evening on the first day of the week, because that's so important. Jesus steps through the doors that were locked, brand new, steps and stands before the disciples, and he says to them, peace be with you. And consequently, I say that to you. Peace be with you. Whatever you got today, peace be with you. Anyway, peace, he says, as God sent me, I'm sending you. And then we read, he breathed on them. Now this, you mean like, what, like, oh, Jesus, you got, like day-old breath. You've been dead. I'm kidding. Don't breathe on us. No, it means more than that. It means more than that. Okay? In Genesis chapter 1 and 2, what did God do to make Adam and Eve live? He breathed on them and animated them with the breath of God. The disciples in the upper room that evening of the first day of the new week were animated with the breath of the living Christ to be people of new creation. So, church, that's the gospel. That is the gospel. Jesus rose from the dead to bring new creation. And I don't mean ghosty Jesus. I mean real life and death, blood Jesus. I'm so serious about this. I'm wondering, does Jesus have to shave in heaven right now? I'm not kidding. Show of hands. Who thinks Jesus has to shave? You never thought of that, did you? Yeah, right. Maybe he has a well-trimmed goatee all the time. Hipster Jesus, right? I don't know. Skinny jeans. No, I'm not kidding. Jesus has to, alive Jesus, y'all. Not like ghosty Jesus. Like, stop, that hurts Jesus. That's Jesus alive. And he brought this new creation because on that cross, on Good Friday, he defeated evil, sin, and death so that we might live in new creation. That's the beauty of Easter Sunday morning. So everybody, Jesus, let's make this relevant for right now. The gospel of Christ, that Jesus is alive, is world altering. Because Jesus saves people for this world, not people from this world. Let me say it again. Jesus saves people for this world, not from this world. Living Jesus saves you for this world so that you can, as the Father has sent me, so I send you in this world, this time, this place, not waiting to just escape. Okay? So the Christian gospel is very, very relevant. The early church, those men and women were tuned up. They were excited. Why? Because, Jesus made good cinnamon rolls and handed them out that morning? Or were they excited because Jesus was alive and everything that he said was now shown to be true? Everything that he did was now shown to be true. God had acted. God had defeated death on the cross. God had done what God had promised, and there was a new way of being. That's excited. I think I read on the internet just like yesterday that somebody won that $500 million lottery just recently. I don't know. How would you be if you realized overnight you won $500 million? Don't you suppose that's kind of the way the disciples felt on Easter Day when they met their risen Jesus? How in the world can we say that Christianity is like all hangdog and sour and, oh man. No, guys, this is good news for today. The light of the world shone upon all of us. The light of the world came and brought freedom and hope and peace and mercy to all of us. That's what the gospel means. And you and I, if you might hit slide 3, you and I are those people who live in the resurrection. We live in the resurrection. We live in the time before Easter and the day when Jesus comes back, however and whenever that's going to look like. We live in here. We're people of the middle, the radical middle. That's us. We're people of the middle. We're living in the resurrection. We're waiting for the final consummation. But right now, we live in the middle. We don't make the gospel, we don't make Jesus into timeless truths. He's not a guru and to teach you how to be nice. He is the very hinge of history. He is the hinge, the turning point of all history, where the old has gone, the new has come. This is Jesus. And our task is to implement the resurrection. Our task is to implement the resurrection in everything, every day, every breath you take, every step you take. I'll be watching you. Sorry, I've been listening to the 80s channel, right? Anyway, we're to implement the resurrection. We're to be people of the resurrection. We bear God's image. We have a calling. Jesus said, as God sent me, so I send you. As Jesus was sent to Israel, so this church is sent to the world. You ever thought about it like that? You have a calling. We have a calling to live boldly into the world. Quite honestly, we can become this frightening group of people that goes around changing things for the good. That's our calling as we live in the resurrection. So I'd like to talk to you a little bit about, I have 2 ways. How does it mean to live? What does it mean to live in the resurrection? What does it really, really look like? First of all, individually, you as a person. What does it mean for you to live in the resurrection? So many times people think Christianity is about rules, right? I listen to NPR, and Terry Gross, Fresh Air, maybe you've heard of her. She always interviews people, and sometimes she interviews people of faith. And I always have to chuckle. One of the questions she always asks people who grew up in the church is, were your parents really strict and not let you go see movies and stuff like that? Were they really hard on you? I'm like, that's a sad caricature of what Christianity is all about. Let me tell you what it is all about. You all know this, but let's say it anyway in case Terry Gross is listening to me someplace. I don't know. Hey, Terry, Christianity is about planting a garden in your life that makes things bloom and grow and fill the air with beautiful perfume. Christianity is about living a glorious life that Christ always made us to have. That God intended us to have this set-free kind of life where I don't have to worry about being torn down by sin and death. I can live free. I can enjoy the beauty. You know, all beauty in the world comes from God, right? Every time you hear a beautiful piece of music, thank God, no matter what kind of music you like. Art, thank God for that. A beautiful dress is a beautiful way of expressing God. Literature, poetry, voice, theater, architecture. Have you ever looked at this room? Glass. It all expresses the glory of God. And oh, church, it's all shot through with the beauty of God. Tell me that's about rules and regulations and you get a faith. No. Christ in you is about living the life God always wanted you to live. It's not about life isn't about finding yourself, because when I find myself in the gutter. All right? When I find Aaron, who Aaron was born as, Aaron is not a pleasant man. But when I find myself in Christ, I am more than that. That's who I am meant to be. You see, we're to bear fruit. We're to live real life. We're to enjoy life because that's what God made us for. You see, often following Jesus is made into this milky, pasty way of being spiritual and religious. You know, like this spiritual, private, vague, personal hope with nothing that impacts the world around us. That's not what Christianity is, guys. Everything in your life, space, time, matter, and time itself are impacted by the resurrection of Christ. Everything is subject to redemption. Everything. And I mean everything. And I'll talk about this in just a second. Did you ever think that city planning was a Christian act? Right? You think about this. How would Jesus lay out housing? What kind of streets and transportation would Jesus want for people? People who have money and people who can't afford cars. What would Jesus do for shopping? What would Jesus do for energy? I'm not kidding. So while we're worrying if he's shaving or not, he's like, dude, I got something more for you to do. Okay? So let's talk about jointly here. What are we going to do jointly? The resurrection, now draw your toes up under the puka. Here we go. The resurrection of Jesus has incredible world-shaking implications. It has world-shattering implications because it is innately political. Oh, you don't talk about politics. Well, Jesus is the king. That means he's a politician too, okay? King Jesus has this to say, everybody. King Jesus has this to say. The resurrected king, Jesus, has political meaning, and that's why the world does not like to recognize him, because he has something to say about city planning and money, everything. Because if I want to be in control, I don't want Jesus to be in control. So Jesus is innately political. Let me say this to you guys. No tyrant, no ruling tyrant is ever threatened by ghosty Jesus that flitted away to heaven. No earthly tyrant is challenged when the church worships a ghosty Jesus that it just was like Frankenstein, God raised from the dead. Like, oh yeah, you got to get back up here. That's not what we're talking about. No tyrant was ever threatened by a church that forgot its resurrection Jesus. No unjust government ever faced an authentic Christian challenge from a church that forgot the resurrection. Right? No unjust system ever faced an authentic Christian challenge from a church that forgot the resurrection and Jesus as King. The resurrection isn't just a spiritual, supernatural, happy ending. It is meaningful in new creation. You see, guys, what gives people hope for tomorrow? What will give people hope for tomorrow? If we don't say anything, they're going to find something. If the church doesn't stand up and say, we've got hope for today and tomorrow in the resurrection of our Christ, our King, and this is what it looks like, they're going to fill it up with something. And what are they going to fill it up with? Hollywood. Is Hollywood a great source of inspiration and hope for the world? No, it's not. Bankers. No offense to bankers in the church today. Money. Let's say money. Is money a good source of hope for the future? No, Paul says the love of money is the root of all evil, right? Yeah, okay, that's out. Politicians? Washington. Hope for tomorrow. Okay. No matter what side of the fence you're on, that's funny. Who dreams the bright dreams for tomorrow, if not the church with a God-given Jesus picture? You see, who dreams of the cities of tomorrow that are equitable and loving and a good use of God's planet that He has made, but Christians? Yeah? Who architecture? Who better than to have ideas of architecture and beautiful, glorious buildings than Christians? Who better to think of what nations and how the relationship between nations should look than people who are Jesus people, or what economies should look like so that everybody has enough, right? Everybody should have enough. We pray that in the Lord's Prayer. Give us this day our daily bread. You ever think of that? Jesus says pray for enough every day. And as church folk, we make sure everybody has enough. Who better than to see what the relationships of tomorrow should look like than Jesus' people who listen and look very astutely to what's going on in the world and work the resurrection into every part of the world, every part of your world. The life-giving force of faith. Not division, not hatred. You see, the world is filled with division and hatred right now. Oh, for crying out loud, just look at the news. Look at Facebook. Everything is just filled with hatred and division. The landscape is inequalities and suspicion. Today is ruled by fear. And when we make choices for tomorrow based on today's fear, we only make the worst of today into tomorrow. And I don't want that, do you? Let us live in the resurrection of Jesus. This glorious Easter day, let us live in the new creation. Let us live it into reality in our hearts and into the world around us, because Jesus, the King, has risen from the dead. Death has been defeated. Evil is no more. Victor Christ is. Amen.